I mentioned in my last video that I predict Klipper will become the most popular 3D printer firmware in 2023. So far that's looking to be true, and then some. This is the Ender 5 S1 and it doesn't run Klipper. But now it does. And this is how. This is the Creality Sonic pad, which even though I'm about to have some mild configuration issues, even that aside, this is quite possibly the most beginner-friendly way to install and run Klipper onto at least most Creality printers, including Steve. Now that's the longest intro I've ever done, so let's go. If you want a review of the Ender 5 S1, I guess those already exist in great numbers, so there's probably not much I can add. The highlights of the machine are this tool head, which is a combination of this wavy, wiggly hot end, which is quite interesting. I'm not really sure why that is that shape. More on that in a future video, as I already bought one. We digress. It's half that and half the sprite, which normally looks like this. But in this case, it looks like this. The Ender 5 S1 is actually a fairly decent printer though, but the interface is not my favourite, so it won't hurt to swap the touchscreen out for Klipper. I should explain that when you put Klipper onto pretty much any machine using the Sonic pad, the screen will stop working because you're controlling it with the Sonic pad, and Klipper generally doesn't support screens. It's not that simple, but I don't want to get into that. So the Sonic pad is Creality's offering in the increasing number of Klipper-based self-contained printer host tablets. Quite a mouthful of words I've just stuck together there. That is essentially what it is. If you imagine a Raspberry Pi and a screen, then you're not far off. That's pretty much the function it's fulfilling. It costs £170 in the UK, although it's £140 right now, and that is not a bad price when you consider that the Raspberry Pi official screen is, I think, £70, and you can't get Raspberry Pis anyway right now, which is frankly ridiculous. It's 2023. What on earth is going on? Why can we still not get Raspberry Pis? But to be honest, historically, you never could. I bought my first Raspberry Pi, I think, in 2011, and you couldn't get them then either. This whole Raspberry Pi shortage isn't new, trust me. So when you turn on the Sonic pad for the first time, or until you set up a printer, you are faced with a wizard which pretty much almost certainly guides you through adding any Creality printer. There's also an other printer option which I don't really recommend until you're used to the idiosyncrasies of the device. So what I'm saying is you really should have at least one Creality printer if you're thinking of buying this, because I recommend setting that up first. I feel like that's probably likely anyway, I think. You pick your printer though, and you're told what to do, and this is something I actually really like. If you've installed normal Klipper in the past, then you would be expecting to have to make a serial connection, and it's quite complicated. Even reading the online documentation on how to do it is confusing. And don't start heading to the comments telling me how I'm an idiot. I've probably been using Linux since before you were born, so I'm quite capable, but it's not well documented, and if you refuse to admit that, then you're not helping, to be honest. If you're a beginner or someone in a hurry that just doesn't want to particularly learn Klipper but just wants to use it, then it's just not great. On the Creality pad, though, you are just told to take the printer's SD card and shove it into the bottom left port, and it flashes the Klipper firmware for the printer that you've chosen onto the SD card, and you stick that into the printer. You turn it back on and you're done, except for the config files. As far as I know, you can't do this with vanilla Klipper, and it would be really cool if you could, because it would be hugely helpful for beginners and people who can't be bothered, like me. This is, of course, all very well and good, but what happens when it doesn't work properly because the config file has the bed dimensions wrong, like it did for the Ender 5 S1? I don't entirely know how this happened, but I think Creality probably needs to fix it. Creality, if you want to fix it, I'll upload a working config and I'll link it below. You could use it, I don't mind. It's pretty easy to just exit out of the wizard to fix this, and to basically just change the printer config file in mainsail and run the calibration again. But it does ruin the slick setup process somewhat. What's the point in having a wizard if it doesn't work? That said, for the other printers I set up, the config was mostly correct. This all goes back to what I was saying in the last Klipper review I did, which was for the Chidi printer. Klipper is something that manufacturers are going to take a while to get working well. There's going to be teething issues, and there are teething issues. But if I may rant on that for just a moment, I believe that we shouldn't make a fuss about this, because if we rant and rave about poor implementations of open source software that are as a result of that software being complicated and general purpose, i.e. Klipper, then what are we going to win as a prize? We're going to win closed source, functionally limited software instead because the manufacturers don't want to deal with our ranting. Just a thought, anyway. That being said, trying out the config files before shipping them wouldn't hurt. That would have been a good idea. Anyway, everything works fine when you've got the right config. Hello, Steve. I'm Klippering Steve because everyone has a Steve. I don't know what the most popular Creality printer is, but it's got to be either a Steve or the original Ender 3 or its Pro variant. All the Ender 3s kind of run on the same hardware, or close enough, so testing a vanilla Steve is kind of like testing an Ender 3 or a Pro. I think it's quite important to do. And Steve posed absolutely no problem. Kind of. You could choose a manual bed leveling Steve or an ABL Steve if you have a probe fitted. I never got around to fitting a BL Touch or a CR Touch, so I'm in manual Steve mode. It works fine, but if you want to add a Z offset and save it, you will get a crash when you restart the machine. Not great. Again, a simple configuration error. It's a simple one-line fix. I'll document this and I'll link it. Again, just another teething issue. Easily solved. Would be better if it didn't happen. Third up, Ender 3 S1 Plus. Creality sent me this one a while back. It's actually not a bad printer, but it's sort of an odd big jumble of the Ender 3 S1 with a non-PEI bed. And it hasn't got the metal heat break, and the user interface is frankly horrible, so it is in desperate need of Klipper to fix that. This one is also supported out of the box, the pad, and this one was actually the easiest to get running, with zero issues at all. I think it just worked. You can simultaneously control up to 4 printers on the Sonic pad, but if you do, you will have used all the USB ports up, and hubs. USB hubs are not an option because of the way it maps the ports. And I wanted to try a camera. As far as I can tell, you could stick a camera into any of the unused ports. I had port 4 empty, so I used that. The first camera I tried didn't work, and neither did the one Creality sent me, which was with the Creality Cloud box. It seems that the Sonic pad is weirdly fussy for which cameras do work. There's a list of working cameras. It's a very short list, and I don't have any of those, but I did just buy a Logitech StreamCam for my second channel, which is called Lost in Circuits. Check it out if you really like soldering irons. I do plan to do some other stuff. But the StreamCam works fine, so I guess it just doesn't like cheap webcams. The StreamCam is actually a good choice. You can consider this a StreamCam review as well. It works way better in low light than most webcams, and if you give it a good amount of light, it actually does look pretty good. So the Creality pad runs sorta normal-ish Klipper. I think it runs on their own repository for the Klipper build, but it's not that obvious if you're not really into Klipper. You can use mainsail or fluid with it in the usual fashion, and it's pretty configurable, but it integrates very well with Creality Print, which is Creality's new slicer that they've been working on. If you use Cura normally, you'll find some parts quite familiar. No huge learning curve here for Cura users, but the printing things screen actually, I find it pretty decent. They've made this quite slick. So if you have multiple pads running multiple printers, this will make things a lot easier to simultaneously manage. If you're thinking about a print farm, even if it's only like 4 or 5 printers, this is an interesting way to do it. Also, for reference, if you want to add a non-connected printer like the V400 I've got up the corner of the room, you can do this in mainsail. It won't show up on the pad itself, but you can add it and control it through mainsail. This is kind of how Klipper hosts work. You can remotely control any printer from any instance of mainsail. If you want it to show up on the Sonic pad screen, though, you would need it to be USB connected and configured through the pad itself, and that is due to the way the ports are one-to-one mapped with the printers on the interface. So what do I think about the Sonic pad? I actually think it's fine. It seems to occupy a niche that I would call the lazy capable user, meaning someone who would potentially have the skills to set up Klipper from scratch if they spent a weekend learning how to, but they don't want to, which is probably the most common type of user, self-included. So while I think the pad is appealing to total beginners, when some config issue pops up, and it will, you have to be able to fix that. People like me, and probably people like you, we can Google our way through solving that, but you have to be prepared to do that. The Sonic pad did get a lot of criticism when it first released, and I didn't really look into why. I think it might be a combination of things that have been solved and issues that you run into with bad configuration like I did. It's a shame that the onboard configs aren't always correct, but it is what it is. They are settings at the end of the day, and the hardware behind it seems fine. And overall, fixing the issues that the Sonic pad throws at you is, in my opinion, a lot easier than trying to get your head around the standard Klipper installation method, including but not limited to trying to figure out what ls dev serial by ID is. I do hope they plan to simplify that part of the process soon. We'll see. Anyway, I think that's probably it for the Sonic pad. Comment below as always. I will see you next time.